Hi there, I'm Brent Toellner. I'm the Senior Director of National Programs for Best Friends Animal Society. Really excited to bring this presentation to you for our roadmap for creating a no-kill nation by 2025. Excited to bring this to you because I really think this is the first time that Best Friends has really brought to you the data and the strategy and the work side by side in this same way, so that you all can see what's happening towards 2025, the progress that's happening towards 2025, and some of the strategies and tactics that we're using to try to get there. And so I'm really excited to be able to share this with you today. So what are we going to talk about? First of all, we're going to talk about the data. You're going to see the data throughout this conference, and it's really important, especially in the context of this presentation, to understand where we've been, where we're going, and what work still remains to be done. We're going to talk about Best Friends' work and the priorities that we're setting and how we're strategically setting those priorities in order to make the biggest impact towards 2025. And then we're going to talk about the work that still needs to be done. What animals remain, what's left to be saved out there in the country as we work towards this goal, and maybe most importantly, hopefully give you some ideas of things that you can do to help be a bigger part of the impact of 2025, to take a leadership role in this as we get closer and closer to 2025. So let's talk about no-kill by 2025. This basically came out when at the Best Friends National Conference in Salt Lake City in 2016, so almost exactly 5 years ago. Julie Castle, our now CEO, at the closing presentation, she came out and said that Best Friends was going to be dedicated to making the nation no-kill by 2025. I was in this audience, like many of you all are now. I didn't work for Best Friends at the time, and I confess, I thought, I listened to it, and I was like, that sounds crazy. And I don't know if you all can think back to where you were 5 years ago, where your organizations, where your communities were 5 years ago, but it seemed really far-fetched. And like there was just so much work that felt like it needed to be done. I'm here to tell you, like over the course of the last 4.5 years, I've gotten a chance to visit a lot of shelters and meet a lot of people and a lot of you all who are doing tremendous work out there. And now more than ever, I believe that not only is 2025 achievable, it almost feels inevitable. And hopefully through the course of this presentation, you'll get a feel for that too. Before I dive in, quickly want to be sure that we define what no-kill by 2025 means. As Best Friends is defining it, we're saying that every shelter and every community has reached a 90% save rate, which is a recognized benchmark for no-kill for both dogs and cats combined by the year 2025. So it's not 90% of the animals being saved. It's not a 90% aggregate. It's every shelter, every community saving 90% or more of the animals that are coming into their shelter. So it's a really ambitious goal. There are 4,404 shelters out there in the country, so there's a lot of different shelters that we need to make an impact in. But I think we're all up for the challenge, and you all have shown over the years that you all are up for the challenge. So let's look at the national data set that just was released today. So as a nation, we have an 83% save rate for all dogs and cats in the year 2020. Our life-saving gap, the number of animals that need to be saved, is 347,000. We're saving 3.5 million, or we saved 3.5 million in 2020. So like 347,000 is a fairly small gap to make up. It's still a lot of animals. Like I don't want to take away from the tragedy for the animals and for the communities where that's happening, but it's so much progress. And I think we should take a lot of pride in the amount of progress that we've made over the last few years. If you look at the map, it's color-coded. The two red states, Texas and California, those two states make up 25% of the total volume of animals that need to be saved. That doesn't mean these states are necessarily doing poorly. They're huge states with huge human populations and thus huge animal populations. So there are a lot of animals coming into those shelters, but from a volume perspective, that's where the largest concentration of animals are in those two states that still need to be saved. The next four states, North Carolina, Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, they make up the next 25%. Again, similar story, not necessarily that the states are doing terribly, it's just that they are mostly large states that are doing, that have a lot of human population and a lot of animal population. But those 6 states combined make up 50% of the animals' lives that still need to be saved. If you're curious about the yellow states on there, the yellow states make up the next 25%, and the light green states make up the remaining 25%. So we know exactly, like, as we roll those up, where we can focus our resources to make the biggest impact. Let's talk about species real quick. Over the course of this conference, over the course of the next 5 years, you're going to be hearing cats, cats, cats a lot. 2 out of every 3 animals that are being killed in a shelter is a cat. That's in spite of the fact that dogs enter shelters at a 5% higher rate than cats do. So even though more dogs are entering shelters, cats are dying at a 2-to-1 ratio. 68% of the animals that are being killed are cats. So we really need to ramp up our cat programming. We need to do more cat adoptions. We need to increase the number of return to field programs that we have for cats. We need to do a lot of that work that will help save more cats' animals' lives. But there were just unprecedented gains in 2020. 1.1 million fewer animals entered shelters, which is a tremendous thing. That's a 20% decrease over 2019. That led to a 44% reduction in the total volume of animals that were killed. So 278,000 fewer animals' lives lost in shelters last year. COVID played a huge impact in that. Obviously, a lot of shelters were in various stages of being shut down or limited admission or limiting the operation of services. But at the same time, a lot of shelters were doing a lot of work to help keep animals out of the shelter because they were shorter of staff. And so they were doing a lot of things like doing managed intake or intake by appointments only, or ramping up return to field programs for their field officers out in the field so the animals never came into the shelter in the first place, or incentivizing friendly finders to be able to go out into the field that would find an animal, to go find that animal's home before it ever came into the shelter, as opposed to making the shelter a waypoint. So we know a lot of shelters implemented those programs, and we think that those will continue to help keep some animals out of the shelter. Yes, do we expect some of the intake to go up in 2021? Probably yes. But do we think it's probably going to go up to 2019 levels? Probably not, because we've put a lot of programs in place for owner retention to help keep animals out in the community and in their homes where they belong. Couple of huge headlines. First and foremost, New Hampshire. New Hampshire joins Delaware as the second no-kill state. Delaware was number 1, where every shelter in the state of Delaware was no-kill. Now we can say that in 2020, every shelter in the state of New Hampshire was also no-kill and had above a 90% save rate. Huge progress there. There are 2 other states, Rhode Island and Vermont, that combined are 80 animals away from both of those states joining this list. So we know that they're on the cusp, and we know that we're making a lot of progress, and it's close. Look at the progress in Texas and California. So I mentioned that those were 2 of the top states in terms of animals' lives that were being lost. But the reality was 38% of the nation's life-saving last year happened in those 2 states. So they're making a lot of progress, a lot of tremendous work happening in those states, a lot of tremendous leaders in those 2 states that are helping make work happen. Florida, you saw that on the top 6 list. 50% of Florida shelters are already no-kill. So they're halfway there in terms of every shelter in every community. So making, again, just a fantastic amount of progress in one of these key states. And I also specific shout out to Los Angeles County Animal Care and Control. Los Angeles County had the biggest decrease in their life-saving gap of any shelter in the country last year. Nearly 9,000 more animals saved last year than in the previous years. So tremendous progress happening in all corners of the country. And we've come a long way. When the state got put in the ground in 2016, we were just coming off of the year 2015. And so at that time, there were roughly 2 million animals that were dying in shelters, or that were being killed in shelters that were savable. We just didn't have positive outcomes for them. It was a 64% save rate nationwide. Over the last 5 years, in just 5 years, we've closed that gap by 76% to where that 2 million has become 347,000. We now have an 83% save rate nationwide. So a 76% decrease in just 5 years, tremendous work. That's an additional 3.4 million animals that have been saved over those 5 years to help us get to that. If you're sitting at your laptop, give yourself a round of applause, because I know there are a lot of people that are listening to this right now that played a big key role in making that happen, and we should all take a minute to celebrate that. It doesn't mean the work's done, but we should celebrate where we are, because it's just a fantastic amount of progress. That progress is happening in no-kill shelters too. So back in 2016, only 24% of the US shelters, whether they were private, whether they were public, whether they were municipal, whether they were open intake or managed intake, only 24% of the shelters across the country were no-kill. That number's doubled just in the past 4 years, from 24% in 2016 to 48% in 2020. Tremendous. So that means almost half of our shelters across the country are now no-kill, and that's exciting. We're going to get to that halfway point this year, and we're going to continue that momentum forward going into 2025. And it's not just at the shelter level. So more than double the number of shelters have achieved no-kill, but also more than double the number of communities have achieved no-kill. So back in 2016, 17% of the communities, which we would define as a county for practical accounting purposes, 17% of communities were no-kill, where every shelter in that county was able to achieve a 90% save rate. That number is now 33%. So now a third of the counties across the country and a third of the communities across the country are no-kill, where every shelter that exists there is no-kill. So what are our strategic priorities? We really designed our strategic priorities around the data and around how we can make the biggest impact. And we have it broken down into 3 key pillars. The first one, saving lives. This is the work that Best Friends does. It's similar to the work that you all do at home, where it's the work that's being done by our sanctuary, by our life-saving centers in Salt Lake City, in Southern California, in the Los Angeles area, in Houston, in Northwest Arkansas, in Atlanta, and in New York City. This is the work that we're doing with adoptions and transports and fosters that is hands-on saving lives every day. We're also doing work to support shelters. We know that getting to no-kill on the shelter level is very, very challenging. And we know that it takes a lot of work. And some of the shelters, we know that you're busy every day, and implementing new programs can be really, really hard when you're just struggling every day to keep your head above water. And we're here to support the shelters in that life-saving work. I'm going to talk a lot more about that one throughout the course of this presentation. And then we're also going to mobilize the public. I'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but we know that this divide between shelters and communities can't continue to exist. If we're going to be successful at the shelter level, we have to get the public involved in our work. We need them to volunteer for us. We need them to adopt from us. We need them to foster for us. We need them just to support the work that we're doing, maybe be donors. We need that community effort, because if we continue with the divide between the shelter and the community, we're not going to be successful. And so some practical things around mobilizing the public that I want to talk to you a little bit more about later in the presentation, because that community engagement and the work that we're doing and getting the community more involved is essential to the work that we're doing. So let's talk more about supporting shelters. Since 2016, when we put the stake in the ground, Best Friends has worked with and directly worked with 975 shelters across the country. You can see them all on the map in various different ways, whether it be through our shelter embed program, whether it be through just mentorships and different coaching and training, whether it's through different types of assessments that we're doing at the shelters. We're engaging with a lot of the shelters that are out there and helping them with their work. I think first and foremost, understanding that this work is hard. There's no judgment in all of this. We get it. Most of us that do this work, we've been in your shoes. We understand the challenges that are there, and that everybody's doing the best with what they have at the time that they do it. And so we're trying to make the best that we can to help connect with as many shelters as we can to help them build the programming they need to save more animals' lives. We're also prioritizing this work, and we've really broken this down into 4 key groupings. Kind of 5, but really 4. So tiers 1 and 2 are the top 250 shelters in the country in terms of life-saving gaps. So these are the 250 shelters with the largest life-saving gap. These 250 shelters out of all of them that are there, make up 68% of the entire life-saving gap in the country. So we know that the largest volume of animals that are dying are happening in a small number of shelters. And so we're able to reach out to those folks and say, like, how can we help? How can we help you save more animals' lives that are coming into your shelters? For Tier 3, that's a remaining almost 1,000 shelters. A lot of these shelters are doing fairly well, but still have a small life-saving gap remaining. And so we want to be sure to help those folks as well. But most of these shelters have fewer than 350 animals that they're working to try to save. So most of them are doing well. Some of them are really small shelters. But again, we wanted to be sure that we capture all of those folks, but we know that the gaps there are smaller. We also now have 2,223 no-kill shelters. Like, I remember coming to the Best Friends Conference maybe 10 years ago, and you could almost go to the presentation of every no-kill community that was there. Like, they would all be there. There were 6 sessions all in the sequence, and it's like, I could go see Charlottesville, and I could go see Washoe County, and I could go see Austin. And it's like, wow, that's great. Like, those are all our no-kill communities. You could almost count them on one hand. And now all of a sudden it's like, there's 2,223. Like, that's almost half of the nation's shelters that are no-kill. I know a lot of them are still struggling, and a lot of you all are still struggling day to day to keep your heads above water. But there are also a lot of those shelters that aren't, that like have capacity beyond their 4 walls, beyond their community boundaries. And we really want to engage more of those folks into helping do the day-to-day work to help their neighboring communities or neighboring shelters or shelters across the country to become no-kill. Also want to be transparent that there are 816 shelters that we don't have data for yet. We think that this represents about 7% of the total animal volume. A lot of these shelters are really, really small shelters. Many of them probably don't even have shelter management software, so they're not providing data to us because they don't have it and it doesn't exist. And so we want to continue to try to collect the data on those shelters so we can continue to close the gap and understand exactly where that gap is. 3 key points that are driving our implementation. Cats. This is at least the second time in the presentation. There will probably be more. Cats are the most at risk, 2 to 1. So we really want to focus on cat programming because we know that there are more of them that need to be saved than dogs. We know that in the 50 states, those 6 states that I mentioned earlier, of Texas, California, North Carolina, Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, we know those 6 states represent 50% of the animals that need to be saved. And so we can focus that geographically in areas that are in the greatest need. And we also know that of those 4,403 shelters, that 250 of them represent 68% of the life-saving gap. And so we can focus at the shelter level too, even if those shelters aren't in some of those key states. So when it comes to supporting shelters, we really have probably 3 different levels of ways that we support shelters and provide support for them. It ranges from one-to-many types of resources to one-to-one resources, where it's really hands-on, one-to-one helping and consulting with them. On the top tier of this is our Lifesaving library, things that we're doing through our Network Partners program, various toolkits and educational materials that we make available to everybody free of charge so you can have the resources you need for any programming that you could possibly need. We also do shelter reviews, coaching and mentorship, so we can provide more help and support to shelters that's beyond just being able to read a manual, be able to provide more coaching and ongoing support. At the most intensive level is our Embeds and programmatic support. These programs, we know, again, some of these programs are heavy lifts. We know that there aren't a lot of resources in some of these communities. And so we're here to help to build that programs and with that programmatic work, and I'll talk about these a little bit more. For our Lifesaving library and toolkits, if you go to the network.bestfriends.org, this is where all of that lives. This is the site for you as animal welfare professionals to get the information that you need. There are more than 25 toolkits on there, ranging from if there's a problem or a challenge that shelters or municipal agencies face, there's probably a toolkit for it. So we cover things like community cats, animal control field services, foster programs, disease management. We even have a thing on life-saving dispatch, which I think is really the first thing that that's ever been created to help dispatchers, who are the first point of contact for a lot of animals in need, implement programs. We also have neonatal kitten program toolkits. Just on and on. If there's a resource that you think you might need or a problem that you have, there's probably a toolkit for it in there. We also do ongoing editorial series about ongoing things in the movement, things that are happening in animal welfare right now that we need to be reacting to and providing our opinions on what those things are going on. We have a video blog that is done by Holly Sizemore, called Saving America's Pets. So it's a video version of a blog that highlights a lot of the stuff that is going on in animal welfare and a lot of key issues across the country. We also have the Best Friends podcast, which is one of my favorite things that we do because it's a way to listen to key industry leaders and key happenings around the country. But I can do it in a way that gets me away from my desk and not in front of my computer for a change. And then we have the Best Friends National Conference, which I think you all know a few things about since you're here for it. So thank you for attending, but it's also something that, again, to connect people with each other, connect people with the resources and knowledge that they need to be able to move forward. Grants, reviews, coaching, and mentoring. Grants continue to play a role in what we do. Last year we gave out nearly $7 million in grants to organizations across the country. For a lot of organizations, they have the knowledge and expertise they need. They have people who know how to implement the programs. They even have the bandwidth to implement the programs, but sometimes the resource that they need is money, that they need cash. And so we want to have a grants program to be able to help organizations overcome that initial barrier of we just don't have the money for startup costs for this program to be able to implement it, or to show that it can be successful so we can get ongoing funding for it. And so that's an important part of our work. We also do shelter reviews. For everybody who's worked at a shelter, I know that when you get in there and start working in your shelter day in and day out, it's hard to see it working any other way other than the way it works right now. Having been there myself, I know that having somebody else from the outside come in and take a look around our shelter, they were able to see things in an entirely different way than I was able to see them myself when I was there every day. And that bird's eye view or outside perspective, there's no shame in that. There's no shame in getting that. In fact, I think everybody should get 2 or 3 different opinions on different things because everybody sees things a little bit differently. And so we do that free of charge for organizations to be able to come in and be able to see what's going on in the organization so that you can get an outsider's perspective on what's working well for you, what's not, where are some inefficiencies, and what are some things we can do better that might help you save more lives. Mentorship and technical support. We know this is hard. You can read all you want to about things and want to set up a program, but inevitably, there becomes challenges along the way, things that you weren't expecting, and we can't necessarily write in a tool book every problem that you're going to have. And so we have people who can come in and help be a mentor for you as you're setting up an individual program. So maybe you're setting up a foster program for the first time, and you want somebody who runs a foster program to be a mentor for you so that when problems arise, you can call up and say, how do I work through this? How do I make it easier on myself to work through this? That's where our mentorship program comes in because it's very program specific. We have people that run Best Friends programs. We have peer-to-peer mentors. So organizations that are part of our network that also do a great job that may have an expertise in fostering, that they are able to help you work through some of the challenges that you have just to make it easier. There's so many people out there being successful. What we want to do is make success easier for everybody so that we don't have to kill ourselves in order to save animals' lives. We also do field officer training. I think this is really important, one that I'm really excited about. For all of the change that we've seen in animal welfare and in animal sheltering over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, I think we're starting to see it happening in field officer work, probably on an incremental scale, and we'll probably see the same thing happen in the next 5 to 10 years. As more and more officers move from the punitive enforcement approach that we used to live by in field services and move towards more of a community-centric approach where they're working as a service to the community and to pet owners in the community, getting animals, instead of pulling them out of homes, helping improve their quality of life while they're in those homes. Or when they find a lost animal on the street, working to get them home in that neighborhood where they were found as opposed to coming into the shelter. And then we also provide ongoing support. It's easy to come to a conference, get really jazzed up, eager to go back to your jobs and go back to your work. It's harder than when things get tough and you start seeing the challenges that are out there. And sometimes just having a voice and somebody to call and just say, am I crazy today? No, I'm not crazy. This is a normal thing. Okay, cool. I feel a lot better about my situation right now. Like sometimes that just ongoing support and coaching is really, really important. And best friends will be there for you on this because we don't want to send somebody in, spend a day with you and then leave. We want to be there so that you can have success on this program ongoing and continue to sustain that success. Embeds and programmatic work. This is the deepest level of engagement that we might have with the shelter. So this is where we might spend an extended amount of time with the sheltering organization. This might be 3 months, 6 months, a year, sometimes more than a year that we'll spend with the shelter with a best friends employee, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, that will come into a shelter and really partner with them to help build the programs from the ground up and really set an organization on the path for sustained success. A lot of this ends up happening in our CAP programming work because again, developing a return to field program can be a monumental task, and getting the support from the community and understanding how to do conflict mitigation out in the field, that's a lot of work. And we know that doing a lot of work when you're already struggling to keep your head above water is really, really challenging at times. And so if we can come in and help you do that and set the stage for a successful program, we want to be there for you and be able to do that. And this is just a handful of the organizations. This is by all means not all of them, but some of the organizations we've worked with very recently or are currently working with for life-saving success, where we have a best friends person, full-time helping and dedicated to supporting these organizations. So it's not just one organization that we're doing this for, it's a lot. And sometimes I'm even surprised when I hear like, oh wow, I didn't even know we had a staff person there. That's fantastic and awesome to see. So it's even great to just see how many shelters we're able to partner with and help them build that programming. I want to talk a little bit about educational certifications because these are new programs for best friends, or relatively new programs. So in animal welfare, there are a limited number of opportunities to get like a certification in animal welfare or a degree in animal welfare, or to be able to have some type of certification that shows that you've really done the work to grow your knowledge in animal welfare. And what ends up happening is a lot of people work their way up through the ranks. They start at a lower level. They kind of get promoted up through because they do a good job at their work, but don't necessarily get all of the certifications or even the training that they necessarily need to be in those roles. And so this is filling in a big gap that we recognize in the industry. And all of this is being done in partnership with Southern Utah University. So it's with a recognized university where you can get your certification from a university, from a program that can even be leveraged into part of a larger degree program for you. So at first, our executive leadership certification, this is a 6-month program, and this is for really leaders within organizations to help them build just their foundation of leadership within their organization. It helps them understand their data, helps them use their data to tell stories to either their board of directors or their city lawmakers to help get the funding that they need for different programs, so they are able to create the compelling story of why these programs are needed using data to create that reason and rationale. It's a 6-month program, can be a standalone executive leadership certification, again, or can be leveraged up into a larger degree program, such as like a non-for-profit management or that type of program. Then we have a management leadership certification, also a 6-month program. This is fairly new for us, but it's one where we've recognized a lot of people moved up into manager roles within organizations, but don't necessarily or didn't necessarily get a lot of the management training that you need to be successful in this role. And so this is really designed for middle managers to get some of that management training so they can be better leaders within their organizations, for people to rally behind and make the meaningful change and permanent change that needs to happen within these organizations. We also have 2 newer certifications, the Cat Lifesaving certification and the Dog Lifesaving certification. Both of these are 8-week programs, and they're exactly what they sound like they would be. So those certifications around life-saving programs that might be specific for dogs or specific for cats. Measuring impact. We don't do anything at Best Friends without measuring the impact of it. And what we know is that organizations that engage with Best Friends are saving lives at a rate at 3.5 times the rate of shelters that aren't engaging with Best Friends. Now, I will say I'm really proud of the work that all the Best Friends programs do. I think they clearly have an impact and have a success. I do think one of the important things about this is not even so much that they're engaged with best friends, but that they're engaged with someone somewhere. Because what we find is a lot of the organizations that are really struggling are isolated. They are not aware of all the changes that are happening in animal welfare. They're not aware of all the new programs that are happening. And so they end up getting caught up doing work a lot of the same way that they did 10, 15 years ago, which isn't good enough now. We all need to grow and progress. And I'm just amazed when I meet new leaders and visit new shelters, like all the progressive work, as we have more organizations doing progressive work, the progress is happening exponentially quicker because you have more minds creating more programs to create all of this. And so I really think that connectivity is the single most important thing of all of it. Whether it's with Best Friends, whether it's with American Pets Alive, whether it's with HSUS, that connectivity somewhere is exceptionally important. But clearly I'm very biased towards the Best Friends work because I know that the success that we have with the shelter partners that we're working with. And that success is even more pronounced in cats. So of the 134 organizations that we've worked with in the last 5 years, specifically working with cats, those 134 organizations made up almost 50% of the entire cat life-saving gap last year. So that's a very small number of the 4,000 plus organizations that are out there, the 4,400 organizations out there. That 46% of the life-saving gap is happening just with 134 shelters that are specifically working with Best Friends on cat programming. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about inclusivity as a part of this. So with all of our data, we are also marrying it with US Census information around demographic information. In this map up here on the left, if you look at the orange, and I'm sure it's a little bit hard to read, but if you look up here on the orange, those are high concentrations of Black or African American populations. The area in green, those are larger concentrations of Hispanic or Latino populations. The blue areas are of Native American populations. If you look down here at the bottom right, that's the map of where the life-saving gap is. You can see there's a little correlation there. And I think what's really important about this is if we're going to be successful in closing this life-saving gap, we need to include everyone. I talked about community support before, and that community support has to come from all members of the community, regardless if they're white, if they're Black, if they're Latino. We need the engagement from all different levels, and we need to change how we engage with those communities in our shelter work. That means being cognizant of how we treat individuals when they come into our shelter to adopt or to volunteer. Being sure that we're cognizant of how we treat people when their pets are potentially at risk of having to be rehomed. How are we handling that? Who do we hire at our shelter to interact with people? Do the people who work at our shelters represent or look like the communities that we're serving? And not just at lower levels, but in management levels as well. We need to take that all into account, because if we're going to get to no kill by 2025, it's going to take the community, and it's going to take all of us. It's going to take every community, not just some communities, not just certain segments of the community. It's going to take all of them. And I really encourage everyone to continue doing the work to embrace every member of your community, regardless of what they look like, regardless of where they came from, to be a part of the life-saving work that's happening in your community at every level within your organization. Really importantly, is no-kill sustainable? Because I know early on we used to always talk about, is no-kill sustainable? Is it a sustainable option? And the answer is a hard yes. So we know that when an organization becomes no-kill, 94% of the time they remain no-kill the following year. That's incredible. So 94% of the organizations that are no-kill this year, statistically will be no-kill the following year. Of that 6%, of that small number that don't achieve no-kill the following year, 52% of them, more than half, achieve it then the following year in year 3. And so they may have a temporary drop-off. And I think this is really important, because I think what it shows is not only when you find out the value of the programming and you're able to build the programming for life-saving success, you're bought into the programs and you're more likely to keep it. But it also shows how important the community being involved in your work is. Because once the community is involved, they will step up and continue to help you whenever you ask for help and help you maintain it. And that community engagement is really essential part of the work that we're doing and essentially in this sustainability piece. Lastly, I want to talk about the Shelter Collaborative. So this is a new program that we've just released this year, and I talked about the no-kill agencies, that there are 2,200 of them out there, and that if every no-kill agency was able to help and support another agency getting to no-kill, we would have this problem solved by 2025. If every no-kill agency was able to help just one other agency, we get to no-kill by 2025. So we started partnering with 4 organizations: Lynchburg Humane, Brandywine Valley, SPCA, Jacksonville Humane Society, and Friends of Strays down in St. Petersburg, Florida, to help 3 other organizations who were building programs, needed help and support, and wanted the help and support. And so they were able to grow that. And so through these relationships, they've been able to help just in the first 4 months of this year. All of these organizations achieve life-saving progress. And this is something that we're going to be doing more of and looking at doing more of is, again, how do we engage more organizations in helping each other to expand our reach. There's a lot of shelters out there. Best Friends doesn't have the bandwidth and resources to enter every shelter in every community to help them get to no-kill. There's just too many of them. And so we need help from you all as no-kill leaders and people who are attending this conference to help and support this work that we're doing. We've always been able to do peer-to-peer on a programmatic basis. I think this is the first time we've really advanced it to like putting the onus of that 90% save rate on that peer-to-peer relationship. And so I'm really excited about this Shelter Collaborative program. I think it could be a game changer in terms of how we expand the work that we're doing, that we know that has proven success. The pilots, if they're any indication, I have shown that it can be a successful program. I want to talk real briefly about mobilizing the public. So I know for many people that no-kill language can be a little bit controversial and that some people don't necessarily like it. I also know that for shelters to be successful, they have to engage the public and embrace the public to get them to be out there to adopt, donate, foster, volunteer, all of the things that we need the public to do for us. Because it can't be an us versus them type of thing. It has to be a more collective us. So what we found, we do research every year on just no-kill language and what the public thinks about it, because we spend a lot of time in animal welfare arguing about it amongst ourselves. But what does the public feel about no-kill? And what we found is that 78% of the public is familiar with the term no-kill animal shelter. So basically 4 out of every 5 people is familiar with the term. Most of those are very familiar with the term. Some are just somewhat familiar. And then there's an additional 10% that have heard of it. They don't really quite know what it means. They wouldn't say they're familiar, but it's not an unfamiliar term to them either. And so in order to embrace the public, while they may not understand the nuance of no-kill in our world, 95% of them think it's really important for this to happen in their community. And 81% think it's either very or extremely important or absolutely essential that it happens in their community. So if we want to engage the public, let's use language that they understand. And so no-kill is language that they understand, that they support, that they want to embrace. And so that's why Best Friends chooses to use it, is again, to mobilize the public. I know that in some communities, they may choose something different. They may have their community followed by 90%, and that may be the branding for it, and that's fine. I'm not here to tell everybody that they need to use no-kill, but I will tell you that Best Friends uses it because we found that it's a very motivating way for the public to get involved in the critical work that we need to do over the next 4 years. It's also why we created our Pet Lifesaving Dashboard. And this is a place where people can go in, find out what's going on in their community, find out what's happening in the shelters in their community. The community is really ill-equipped to solve a problem if they don't know it exists. And so this is an opportunity for them, hopefully in a constructive way, to find out what the challenges are in their community and what work still needs to be done. We allow people to go in at the state level. So this is the state of Utah. And you can see that there are 829 lives that still need to be saved in the state of Utah. That feels doable. even across an entire state like the city of Utah. 42 of the 60 shelters are no-kill. So you're able to see what the need is for each of those individual communities. You're also able to click in at the community level and at the shelter level and see more about information about what's going on specifically at the shelter in your community. I do hope that people use this in a positive and constructive way. This is not a way of trying to embarrass anyone or shame anyone into the fact that there's a life-saving gap. So if you see a shelter in your community that is struggling, that needs some help, go there, visit them, and find out what you can do to help. Don't blame them for being in the situation they're in. Find out what situation they're in and be a part of that life-saving solution for them. And if there's a resource that you can provide or find for them to help them achieve their no-kill success, we should do that. And I hope this can be a tool for people to be able to do that. So how can you help? How can you be a part of this? We're 4 years away, folks, and we've made so much progress since 2016 to close 76% of the gap, but we've got some remaining work that needs to be done. How do we get there? And I hope through some of this you've heard some ideas that might spark this for you. You know, are you a citizen that can go into the dashboard and find a shelter in your community, reach out to them and say, how can I help? How can I be a part of a solution for you to better the lives of animals in our community? Maybe you work for an organization that is no-kill, that might be able to help support and be like, hey, maybe I can provide some mentoring in this area. Like, we don't do everything very well, but like we run a really great foster program, and I would love to mentor people on my foster program. Tell us, let us know, or find an organization out there without involving best friends and help them grow their foster program so they can save more lives through foster. Maybe your shelter, it does a lot of things really well, and you're like, you know what, no matter what happens within an organization, I feel like we have the staff and the expertise here to be able to solve it. Or with a few exceptions, maybe I might need some help on a couple of areas, but I feel like we have the expertise to be able to do that. Reach out and consider being a part of this Shelter Collaborative project because I really feel like that's going to be a way for us to be able to grow and be able to touch more shelters, to be able to help more shelters to achieve life-saving success. It changes the world for the animals in those shelters, obviously, but seeing the change of the people in the shelters where they no longer dread coming into work every day and they can be proud of the work that they're doing is such a monumental change for them. We can't help ourselves but find this to be really important, and we can do that by 2025. If you have any questions on the presentation, feel free to reach out to me. Here's some contact information for me. You can feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to connect with anybody at any point in time. Thank you for participating in this, and good luck and enjoy the rest of the conference.